We're back here on Sportsline. The college football playoff announced over the weekend. And for the first time, really, we had some real debate at the end. Last year, I know Penn State was left out as the Big Ten champion. And people made a big deal because they beat Ohio State and they won the Big Ten. Ohio State didn't win the division. But what truly was the case last year is you picked Washington as the Pac-12 champion over Penn State, or the committee did, for the number 4 spot. Because Ohio State was so high in the rankings all year that even after they lost, they didn't fall out of the top 3. And that's still where they were on Selection Sunday because of all of the high-end wins at Oklahoma, beating Michigan State, all of the high-end wins that they had last year, Wisconsin last year, before that Penn State game. That was a big difference to this year. So this was the first time truly where it came down to 2 teams at 4. It was hard to differentiate the 2, and the committee comes up with what they came up with, which was putting Alabama in. Alabama at 11-1, but second place in the SEC West after losing to Auburn. Ohio State 11-2, the Big Ten champion after beating Wisconsin on Saturday night. Here is what I believe. I believe Alabama is the better football team than Ohio State. If they played this weekend in a play-in game, I'd install Alabama as the favorite. I just think they're the better football team from what I've watched. But I'll also admit that I've watched things before and been wrong. And I think we all have. So I think the more reliable thing in sports generally is to rely on what people have actually done and not just how you perceive them from watching. Because to me, Alabama looks like the better team. They look like the better team. But when you watch the results of their actual season, they really had 4 games against anybody who could test them at all. Florida State at the beginning of the season before they really got beat up. And that was a tight game into the 4th quarter. And then obviously Florida State fell off as the season went along. LSU was a tight game in Tuscaloosa. Mississippi State, arguably they should have lost. And then Auburn beat them. Alabama was not this juggernaut that absolutely dominated good competition. They dominated other people, but they did not dominate the best teams on their schedule. Ohio State, on the other hand, has 5 wins over the top 25. 5. 3 of them are over the top 15 in the own committee's rankings. They just did more on the high end. And a couple issues I have is, 1, so that's their resume. It's better on paper. 2, I think the committee definitely penalized for losses. And in Ohio State's case, they got penalized badly, and rightfully so, for a 31-point loss at Iowa. But I think, and I say this every year about the NCAA tournament too, when you get to the back end of these things, everybody's flawed. When you're talking about the 4th team, both Alabama losing to Auburn and Ohio State losing to Iowa, those are things that could be, maybe should be disqualifying for you to get into the field, for you to be in this playoff. But you're right there with a chance. And so my own personal opinion is when you're looking at these teams on the back end to put into your tournament or into your playoff, I don't want to know what you did on your worst day or in your worst moment, because if you come with your worst moment in the playoff, you're going to lose. You're going to lose to anybody in there if you come with your worst moment. What I want to know is, who are you at your best? When you play at your best, what can you do? Can you beat everybody else in this field? And while I think Alabama could, I don't know that, because they haven't played anybody like that this year other than Auburn, whom they lost to. Ohio State beat Wisconsin, who's 6th in the ranking. They beat Penn State, who's top 10 in the ranking. They beat Michigan State, who's top 15 in the ranking. They beat 2 other teams in the top 25. Ohio State beat teams that are legitimate, beat teams that are really good. So on their best day, they can compete in the Final Four. I know that. I believe Alabama can, and frankly believe Alabama's better than Ohio State. But I don't know for a fact that they will go into the tournament and compete, because they didn't show it on the resume. So I think that's a scary thing when you're looking at these playoff rankings. I also think it sets a bad precedent, and they did it last year too with Ohio State. But again, the difference is a year ago, Ohio State was already in the field. going into championship weekend and just didn't fall out with other teams doing what they did. This year, Alabama was out of the field. They were 5th last week in the ranking. Didn't play on Championship Saturday and moved into the Final Four. That I have a huge problem with, because everybody else who played last weekend essentially played a win or you're out game. Clemson was number 1 in the country, played Miami in the ACC championship game. Excuse me. If Miami wins that game, Clemson's probably out and Miami's in. If Georgia or Auburn lost, they're out. Oklahoma loses TCU, they're out. Big Ten game. Win and you're in, maybe. Lose and you're out. It was a win or go home game for all of those teams on Saturday. And Alabama sat at home and didn't play and then backed their way into the field on Sunday. I don't like that, because in essence, the way these things should work out is Championship Saturday should serve as sort of a quarterfinal round to your playoffs. And it did for pretty much everybody Saturday, except for Alabama, who got a bye because they weren't good enough to win their division. They couldn't beat Auburn. They couldn't win the division. They couldn't play for an SEC championship. So in essence, they got a bye into the semifinals of the national playoff. And I just don't think that's right. So I think that's a bad precedent they set. And maybe the biggest message out of it is, I think long term, I think this may be the end of the 4-team playoff. I don't know if it'll happen by next year, but the idea that the SEC in its worst season in recent memory got 2 teams into the playoff and you shut out 2 of the other Power 5 leagues, including the Big Ten, where Jim Delaney, the commissioner, may just be the most powerful man in college sports. I think there's going to be a lot of boardroom bickering and back channel digging on these things. And I think the push is going to start to expand the field. Whether that's to go to 6 teams or to go to 8 teams, I don't know. We'll see. But I think the idea now that the Big Ten got left out and the Pac-12 got left out again, the Big 12's been left out before, I think that is going to start pushing these people to say, all right, at the very least, we need our conference champions in. We need our conference champions in from each of the Power 5 conferences, and then there'll be some at-larges. So an Alabama can get into the field. But we need to protect ourselves in our own interest as conference commissioners or league representatives and make sure that our champion gets a chance to be in the field. I think we're headed there. Who knows how quickly? It's a 12-year deal for the 4-team playoff. I would be stunned. This is year 4. I would be stunned if we get all the way through 12 years without some adjustment to this system. I'd just be stunned, especially after what we saw on Sunday. Your thoughts on all of this, or on the Titans, as we talked before, the Tennessee coaching search. 737-7767 is the number. We say hello to Tim. Tim, thanks for the call. You're next up here on Sportsline.
How you doing? How you doing?
Doing great, thanks.
Well, I just want to say this. I'm a diehard Tennessee Titan fan. I'm just going to say it like this. We do need our fan support, but, you know, at the end of the day, if the fans don't want to come out and support, that's all right. I'm happy for the Titans because they're still winning. It ain't pretty. It's always ugly, but I like an ugly win. But I'm going to say this right here, too. We need to put LaShawn Sims, the cornerback, take Adore Jackson out, and let him be the third running back. So, you know, if we can do that with the offense and the defense keep doing what they're doing, we're gonna make it deep in the season winning. But we got some tough games coming up. You know, the Rams and Jacksonville, they gonna be tough. But I'm not gonna, you know, just say nobody can beat the Titans, but we can beat a lot of folks out there if they play like they've been playing.
Sure. They're figuring out ways to win, Tim. There's no question about that.
Right.
And I think you're right about the fans. Here's what I saw on Sunday. There was a lack of interest in terms of people filling the stadium. There were 10,000 empty seats or so, as we mentioned. But the people who were there, they were passionate and they were loud and they were into the game. And that's as important as anything. I mean, I'll take 58,000 people who are screaming their head off every play over 69,000 people who are passively into it. The fans were ready to go on Sunday, and that was huge for this team.
I'm a fan. You know, I don't get to go to the game as much, but, you know, I think like this. As long as we keep winning, if the fans don't want to show up, the team is winning. Everybody need to be happy for the Titans because we haven't been off in the playoff, and we haven't had the deep pushes like what we're doing now.
Right.
I mean, we need to get behind this team. Just like the Predators did what they did last year, the Titans can do the same thing.
Well, that's the question. Tim, thanks for the call. I think a lot of people are wondering why it hasn't gotten to that point yet. I mean, it has been a decade, and here the Titans are on the cusp, and yet there just isn't the buzz in the city right now that we saw last spring for the Predators. And that's mystifying for some people because, you know, no one would have confused Nashville as a hockey town 3, 4, 5 years ago. Nashville in the South has always been a football town and a football region. So here's your football team, your professional football team on the cusp of doing something pretty great. And it just doesn't have the excitement. And I've heard people differing from the last caller who said, hey, as long as they're winning, even if it's not pretty, fantastic. It's good for the Titans. It's good for the city. I've heard a bunch of people over the last few days say, man, winning's not good enough. I need to see something better than that. I need to see some excitement. I need to see a more fun style of play. How spoiled have we gotten, I guess? I don't know if that's the Preds or what, but this is a team that hasn't been to the playoffs since 2008. And here they are, a month away from doing just that this season, and people are complaining they're not winning with style points now, it seems. What's your take on all this? 737-7767 is the number. We go back to the phones now. And Robert, hello.
Hey, how you doing?
Doing great. Thanks for the call.
Man, Tim hit on it. It's ugly, and you kind of stole my thunder. It's not exciting. We need some exciting plays to get people to fill the stands. I think that's all we're lacking. Everybody loves the Titans, but they're just not hyped up about it. You know what I'm saying?
Sure. What are the exciting plays you need to see, though? I mean, they had a 75-yard touchdown run that put the game away on Sunday, and that was right after one of your young players comes up with a game-saving interception in the end zone.
Often, dude. Yeah, things like that will get people in the stands. But you kind of stole my thunder. I mean, right after Tim said that, you said maybe more exciting play. I'm going, why am I on the phone? You know, because he already said that.
Well, Robert, I appreciate you being on the phone.
Okay, and as far as the soccer field going down the fairgrounds,
yep.
You know, I live around that area. Yuppies moved in here, and they go, that racetrack is loud. Where'd you think he's moving to? You know, and soccer's not really I don't want to say a redneck or hillbilly sport, but, you know, I ain't into it. But I'll hang up now.
All right, Robert, we appreciate it. I mean, I think it's great for the city to have another Major League sport team coming here. Hopefully we'll find that out in the next couple of weeks with the MLS decision. And I think there'll be a rabid audience for it. I actually saw something yesterday that said the MLS playoff coverage this year, Nashville was a top 10 market in the country in terms of interest in reading and viewership and all those sort of things. And we don't even have a team yet. So whether it's specifically in the neighborhood around the fairgrounds or just the city and the region, I think there's a lot of people around here who will be very excited if we do indeed land this MLS team. And I think we're one of the favorites going into the vote with the MLS folks coming up in a couple of weeks. It's interesting, though. People talk about the excitement with the Titans, and they want to see more, and I get that. I get it. But it's difficult to win in the NFL. You're not just going to throw 75-yard touchdown passes every drive. You've got to grind it out here and there. I was looking back earlier today at the scores from the Titans team that went to the Super Bowl back in 1999 into 2000. They had a bunch of kind of ugly games throughout the course of the year. They figured out the win, got hot late in the year, obviously got hot into the playoffs, and go all the way to the Super Bowl. this is a Titans team that hasn't hit their stride yet necessarily. You got to hope that they do that in December and into January, just like that team did. But the great thing about this Titans team, as you look at it as a fan, or as I look at it just as someone who covers the team, is it's clear they have not hit on all cylinders yet. Offensively, defensively, they're not clicking on all cylinders. Yet they're still figuring out how to win games. They've won 6 of their last 7 games, and that's a great trait. When you believe in a tight game, you're going to figure out a way to win it. You're going to drive the field for a touchdown. You're going to come up with the interception like LaShawn Sims had the other day. Those things are huge for chemistry and for your belief in those tight games. The Titans already have that in spades, the way they played so far this season. Now if they can take their actual execution to the next level, and now you can talk about a team that could be really dangerous in the playoffs. Back to the phones we go. Let's say hello to James. James, you're next up here on Sportsline.
Hello?
Yep, you're on the air.
Yeah, okay.
Go ahead, James. You're on live TV.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about that. They got the 4 top college games on there. You got Alabama's playing Clemson, and I think Georgia's playing
Oklahoma.
Oklahoma.
Yep.
Now that's right there, the top best 4. You know? You see what I'm saying? Ain't I right on this? I know I'm right on this.
Those are the 4 teams in the playoff. Yeah, what's your question?
Why would they try to throw somebody else in there when you got the top 4?
Well, the debate would be whether Alabama was worthy of being in the top 4. A team that was arguably the 3rd best team in the SEC this year, right? Because they didn't even make the championship game. They finished 2nd in their division. So you're saying they're the 3rd best team in the SEC, basically, and that's good enough to get them in the playoff? Where Ohio State's the champion of the Big Ten, which had the most teams ranked in the top 25, and that wasn't good enough. I'm not saying that that's wrong. I'm just saying there's certainly an argument to be made that Ohio State deserved that spot every bit as much, if not more, than Alabama did.
Can I ask you one more question?
Sure.
If Alabama was to win and Georgia was to win, how many times 2 SEC teams has been in that national championship?
Well, it's never happened in the playoff era, but remember, the playoff era is only 4 years old. The last time something like that happened was 2011 or 2010, 2011 on the calendar. But the 2010 season when Alabama and LSU played in a rematch, and actually that game, as dismal as it was and as terrible as the ratings were, was pretty much the impetus to getting the playoff because nobody wanted to see 2 SEC teams play each other again. So, I mean, it's happened before. We've seen a couple other instances of that as you go back in bowl games. But, it's very rare to get 2 teams from a conference battling for a national championship or any type of a rematch. This wouldn't be a rematch because Georgia and Alabama didn't play. But it would obviously be 2 SEC teams going at it.
Okay. Well, that's 2 of my questions I wanted to ask.
All right. Well, thanks, James.
Anyway, thank you, man.
Yep, thanks for the call. We appreciate it. Sneak one more in here. Let's say hello to Joe. Joe, good evening.
How you doing?
Doing well. Thanks for the call.
Am I online now?
You are on the air.
Yes, sir. I just want to say that everybody talks about how how the Titans need to show more enthusiasm or charisma. I think they're doing an excellent job, and I just believe that everybody needs to just back them up. Just back them up. I've been to the last 5 games. I've seen them lose. I've seen them win. But hey, you just got to keep back. You know how long we waited for a team here in Nashville. So if you're from Nashville, you need to be a Titan, and don't worry about a win's a win. If we play New England or somebody, or we play somebody and we beat them by 2, we'd be the best team around.
Sure. Yeah, I think you bring up a good point there, Joe. One of the things that I think every time people want to talk about a team playing really pretty, they want to see a team that's just a little more flashy out there. Not just winning, they want to see some flash. First off, in the NFL, how many teams do that on a consistent basis? I imagine people think that about the Patriots. I think the Saints are doing it this year. I think by and large the Aaron Rodgers, Green Bay Packers teams have been pretty and won. There's not a lot of other teams out there that are both winning and pretty. Just doesn't do it. The Falcons last year, they're a good example of a team that won and was pretty. But even there, they're struggling this year and have struggled this year a lot. It's difficult to do that because everybody in the NFL gets paid and everybody is good. Here's the thing, though. Here's the thing if you're talking about the Titans right now is they're getting it done. People want pretty. The Detroit Lions have been very pretty in recent years. Matthew Stafford puts up big numbers. Calvin Johnson, when he was still playing, was one of the best receivers in the league. They had productive running backs. That offense was pretty. They put up points. They never won. Never won anything consistently. They didn't win divisions. They weren't in the playoffs very often. I mean, they played pretty. They were exciting football, as people said, but they didn't win. So here's the Titans. Maybe they're not as pretty as you want. Maybe they're not as exciting offensively as you hoped for. But they're winning. They're 8-4. They've won twice as many games as they've lost, and they're in first place in December for the first time in a decade. Just seems to me like there should be a little bit more buzz around here about that. About something that hasn't happened in 10 years. Being on the brink with this team. Even if they're not, the Mona Lisa. They're getting it done. All right, we got to take a break. We will come back. More of your phone calls after this. Line still open, 737-7767, the number. Stay tuned. More Sports Line on the way after this.